So our current greenhouse is 10 by 16, so 160 square foot, and we've simply just outgrown it. What's up, Lazy Dog fam? Hope all y'all are having an awesome day. It is Wednesday, August 14th here in South Georgia, and on our last few videos I've kind of teased this structure here behind me, but on today's video I'm going to tell you all about it. So about a week or so ago, when this thing was just starting to be built, I put a picture on our social media pages and said that our arch panel trellis behind me, where we grow a lot of pole beans, was no longer big enough, so we were building an even bigger one. But I don't think a lot of people got the joke, because we had a lot of people commenting about, oh, that's exciting, you're building a high tunnel, now you're going to be able to show us how to grow food all throughout the winter and all this stuff. Well, not exactly. That's not exactly what we've got here. So this structure isn't going to be used for seed starting, isn't going to be used to grow vegetables throughout the winter. Yes, there may be an occasional potted pepper or tomato plant in there, but this is going to be primarily used to grow fig trees. So our current greenhouse is 10 by 16, so 160 square foot, and we've simply just outgrown it. Because thanks to you all, the fig tree operation here at Lazy Dog Farm is growing faster than this little greenhouse can keep up with. We've been very, very blessed, and we are very, very thankful, but we've got to expand. So we're going from 160 square foot to 1,280 square foot. This thing right here is 32 by 40, basically 8 times the size of that small one. So we're keeping our little greenhouse. We'll still do all our seed starting content in there, playing around, trying to propagate some different things now and then. But this one here behind me, like I said, mainly going to be used for fig propagation and growing fig trees. I know that may be kind of a buzzkill for some of y'all. Y'all are excited to see me growing all different things throughout the winter in this thing, but probably just going to be used for figs. We will still have a lot of content that we do in that smaller greenhouse though, so don't be too disappointed. Now before I show you all the features of this new one, let's go over a few things. I'll tell you where I got it, tell you why I'm not building it myself. So we got this one from the same place we got that little greenhouse, which is Atlas Greenhouse over in Alapaha, Georgia. I like using them because they're local here and they make a pretty good product. I don't get any perks from them for mentioning their name. They're just close to here and I like what they have. I have had really good experiences with their sales staff, and so they've been a pleasure to work with so far. So Atlas Greenhouse, from what I understand, has several different crews that install these greenhouses that you get from them. So you buy the greenhouse from Atlas and then they help you outsource the installation of it. And so the guy that's building this bigger one here is the same guy that built my small one about 3 years ago. Now, unlike just a simple high tunnel, which you can probably build yourself if you've got a little bit of construction sense, probably can't build this one by yourself. You really need a professional greenhouse builder, somebody who has done this time and time again. As I walk you through and show you some of the features on this, I'll mention some of the examples why you really need somebody who knows what they're doing, who puts together greenhouses for a living. For example, Owen, the guy who's building mine here, he says he doesn't follow those instructions given by Atlas at all. He's got his own process that he uses that works a lot better, so he knows kind of the right order of operations to make things go smoothly. He also told me that it happens all the time where somebody will buy a greenhouse from Atlas, hire their own construction person to put it together, and then he usually has to go in at some point and clean up the mess, fix everything, and put it together like it's supposed to be put together. So this one is being professionally installed for good reason, and I really like the job they're doing on it so far. Now, one more thing to mention here. Having a greenhouse in South Georgia is obviously a lot different than having a greenhouse in the middle of the country or the northern part of the country. We're not worried as much about keeping this thing warm. We're worried about it getting too hot. And so that's why I have roll-up sides on my smaller greenhouse. I often leave the door open all the time during the summer so it doesn't get too hot. We also recently added some shade cloth this year, which has helped with that. And this bigger one here will have roll-up sides as well. If you completely enclose one down here, you're going to have to invest in some pretty pricey cooling equipment to keep it from getting too hot. We opted for the roll-up sides so we don't have to spend quite as much on cooling equipment. And another thing that's going to help is this greenhouse here is a lot taller than our smaller greenhouse. Now, I'm not going to get into all the physics behind it, but supposedly the taller the greenhouse, the easier it is to keep cool during the summer months, because the air will stratify inside the greenhouse. If you can get that heat layer higher above the plants, you can keep things cool better. All right, so now let's talk about the ins and outs of this thing. This particular model is called the Budget Plus model. I don't know if this particular model was on their website. They have one called the Snow Arch, which is basically the same exact thing as we have here, but not quite as sturdy on top. We don't get snow down here, don't have to worry about a snow load. So pretty much like the Snow Arch you'll find on their website, just not quite as beefy up top. So the first thing they did when building this thing is put in these posts right here, and every single one of these posts is concreted in the ground. Took a good bit of concrete, but this puppy isn't going anywhere. They actually had to use a little bobcat over there with an auger to drill the holes. Got those posts down there, got them concreted in the ground, so we got a nice sturdy structure here. So the top of this thing and the roll-up curtains obviously are going to be plastic, but we went with the hard poly siding on the ends. So it wasn't that much more expensive to go with poly siding on the ends as opposed to just using more plastic. It is a lot more expensive if you do poly siding over the whole thing, and then you've got that whole issue of it being enclosed and having to have some more expensive cooling equipment. So we went with the poly siding just on the ends because I thought it would look a little nicer. Also, I thought it would help a little bit in the winter months when we do need to run a heater in here. It might give us a little more insulation, and the poly siding lasts a good bit longer than the plastic does. So you'll notice we've got a pretty standard door on this end. There's no door on the other end. I didn't see any reason to have doors on both ends. Probably just going to be going in this way. Now they do have the option of just doing a bigger roll-up door as opposed to the door I have, but I don't need to drive a forklift into this greenhouse here. I'm just pulling my little wagon in and out of it. I don't need a really wide door, and that roll-up door, then I got to worry about sealing off the edges in the wintertime when I do need to run a heater in there. Now once they're done putting the plastic on top of this thing, which hopefully happens in the next few days, they'll also be putting a big shade cloth up there, much like we have on our smaller greenhouse. That'll help keep things cooler too. Now you've probably already noticed we do have ground fabric on the floor in this greenhouse. We don't have it in the smaller one, although I wish I would have done it in the smaller one. Those guys are really good at putting this stuff down, getting it nice and tight. So here's a perfect example of why it pays to have a professional greenhouse installer doing this as opposed to me trying to do it myself. I would have thought, oh, we'll put down the ground fabric very last thing we do once everything else is built. But actually, the ground fabric was one of the first things to go down, and I completely understand why they did it this way now. So they put the ground fabric down, and then they put those metal pieces at the bottom, covered it up with soil there to keep it nice and tight. Same thing down here before they even put these walls or those bottom rails in place. They had the ground fabric down. Now it's held in place, can't really move. Once they're done around here, they will backfill that right there, cover it with soil. Should look really, really nice when it's all done. So now let's talk about fans, because that's what kind of takes this greenhouse to another level compared to what we've been working with. I don't know that I would call this a commercial or professional greenhouse, but it's definitely more than just a hobby greenhouse like we already had. Let's call it semi-commercial. And so this thing is going to have a two-phase fan and vent system built into it. There's the vent right there. That will be hooked up to a thermostat, power source obviously, so that vent will open when it gets a certain temperature inside here. And then on the back side there, where you see that big square hole, that's where the fan's going to go. And there's the fan right there. I'm told that's going to get installed tomorrow. So this is how it's all supposed to work, or so I'm told. I'm sure I'll have to play around with it once I get power ran out here to this new greenhouse. So the vent's going to have its own thermostat. The fan is going to have its own thermostat. We're going to set the vent thermostat 2 degrees lower than the fan thermostat. So when it gets a certain temperature, gets so hot in there, that vent is going to open. When it gets 2 degrees hotter than that, that fan is going to start blowing, hopefully blowing that hot air out of there, keeping things circulated, keeping it from getting too warm. And then we're also going to have two additional fans, two decent sized oscillating fans hanging from the rafters there, which is going to further circulate the air in this thing. Now those two additional fans, Atlas calls them HAF fans, are going to help us keep things circulated in the warmer months, but I think they're really going to help in the cooler months when we do occasionally have to run a heater inside this thing. Going to keep things moving around, keep from having some cold pockets develop in places inside the greenhouse. So when I do eventually get power run to this greenhouse, get everything wired up, I'm going to have them put a 50 amp hookup inside the greenhouse, because when I do eventually need to heat this thing occasionally in the winter, I think I'm going to go with a 10,000 watt salamander heater that's on wheels. I can just roll it in there, plug it up. That should be sufficient for keeping this thing warm. Yeah, my electricity bill will go up, but compared to what I've spent on propane in the last few years, I think that's going to be a better option for me. And then as far as benches and a watering system inside here, still got some pondering to do on that. I do know though that I'm going to start out with some of these dunnage racks that we've been using in the little greenhouse here. Probably going to get a few more of those just to get me started in the big one. I really like these things so far. They're super sturdy and a lot better than something I could make with wood. So in the beginning, we'll just have those dunnage racks lined up on the floor in the new greenhouse. As we need more space in there, I'll probably create some kind of 2-level or maybe even 3-level system. We've figured out in the small greenhouse, we don't really need a lot of light to propagate these fig trees. So we could have 2 or 3 shelves in there and it worked just fine. Haven't figured out how I'm going to do that, but I'll get there. And then as far as irrigation or an automatic watering system goes, I think I've got enough sense to do that myself, create an automatic watering system in there. But here's the problem. When we're propagating figs, those cuttings need very little water. You give them too much water before they form roots and leaves, they will rot. So minimal water on the cuttings that we're rooting, but once they get a nice root ball on them, once we step them up some larger pots, they do need some frequent watering. So I'm going to have to figure out how to set up some zones in there, maybe have a cutting zone, maybe have a fig tree zone. That way one zone waters at a certain frequency and the other zone waters at a different frequency. So if you've done that before or got any suggestions on how to do that, please do share in the comments below. Anyways, hope you enjoyed finally seeing what's going on behind us. Let me know in the comments below what you think about it. And if you're thinking, well, that's way too big for me, but I wouldn't mind having one of those smaller ones, watch this video right here. We'll show you the build and the install several years ago on that smaller greenhouse, how kind of it all went together. So check that out, and we'll see you next time right here at Lazy Dog Farm.